Hello and welcome to the Canadian Science Policy Conference 2023. I'm here with Shohini Ghose, a professor of physics at Wilfrid Laurier University, as well as the NSERC Chair for Women in Science. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we're here today to discuss your new book, published just a month ago, titled Her Space, Her Time. So this book mainly deals with and highlights the lives and careers of women scientists, particularly physicists, over the last couple of hundred years. Could you expand on that? Tell us a little bit more.
Sure. So the book is not just a series of biographies. I wanted to tell the stories of these women, but from my perspective, which is as a scientist myself, I wanted to tell their scientific stories. So the book is about these big, huge scientific discoveries, things like discovering dark matter or new particles in nature or understanding the Big Bang better. So major discoveries that have transformed physics, but not really attributed to these amazing women who were involved in this story. So I wanted to tell that story of discovery. Each chapter is about one of these big discoveries, but told through the journeys of these women who contributed to that particular discovery. So it turns out that's a pretty big story. Almost every big physics and astronomy discovery has those kinds of backstories. So it's really that's the story that I want to tell, the collective journey and about the process of science, as well as all of the challenges these women faced, because of course it was mostly a field dominated by men. So there's all kinds of personal stories in there too, and lots of lessons to be learned.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic that we have, I guess, a compilation of these brilliant careers in this book. That sounds fantastic that you're highlighting the roles that these women played and the impact that their careers have had. Would you say that there's any particular physicist in this book or outside of it that has particularly inspired you?
Yeah, actually, the book has stories from women from all around the world. So the one that I have a special connection to is this woman named Bibha Chaudhary, because she's Bengali, like me. So I grew up in West Bengal in India, and so did she, of course, a few decades before I did. But when I was a schoolgirl in India, I didn't even know her name. And turns out Vibha Chaudhary was involved in the discovery of two fundamental particles in nature right before World War II. And that was back in India when India was part of the British Empire. So there wasn't a lot of resources and funding for her. So she actually abandoned her work. And then after the war, a British physicist built on her techniques and what she had discovered and was able to confirm the discovery of one of these particles called a pion. And he won the Nobel Prize for it. Whereas she was ignored, as was her colleague, another Bengali physicist named D.M. Bose. But they went on to do more work. She was involved in yet another big discovery of another particle called the neutrino and had a great career, very distinguished. And yet we don't really know her name as a household name in India or elsewhere. So for me, my personal connection to her story and my own background was really special and very inspiring. But also I don't want, Bengali kids or kids around the world now to never know her name. So I hope she gets more celebrated.
Yeah, and your book will play a big part in celebrating her life.
So,
So with yourself being a physicist, how would you say that the tone or culture of academia has affected you?
well, I've always loved physics. I can't imagine doing anything else. So I'm very passionate about being part of the physics community and engaging with others who share that same passion with me. But over the years, certainly, I've been often the only woman in classrooms, and I've had professors who walked in saying, "Good morning, gentlemen," and things like this, right? And it becomes quite lonely, and then you start questioning yourself, and you wonder, well, maybe I don't belong in physics. So I've gone through all of those kinds of feelings. I still have them. Imposter syndrome is still strong, and I'm not alone. A lot of women and underrepresented minorities feel this. But when I was experiencing all that as a student, I didn't really know where to look to figure out whether I should stay or leave. And I often thought I should just quit. And then later, as a scientist, I wanted to think of it, in scientific terms and understand what is it like, to answer your question of what is it like to be a woman in physics today, or a person, from a background that is, not well represented. So I went back and started learning all the research and understanding what are the factors that impact our experiences and understanding what does it mean to be a physicist. And it turns out there's lots of issues and barriers. And there's lots of research about what works and what doesn't work and how we can address what the experiences are and build a more inclusive environment. So for me, over the years, my experiences have changed and evolved, and I feel like I've found others in this space who can help and provide, scholarship and expertise that could help us improve the environment. So I wouldn't have to feel as lonely as I did when I was a student, and perhaps future generations won't.
Yeah, and as you say, you've been quite active in trying to fix this culture of ours. So you're also the director for the Center of Women in Science at Wilfrid Laurier University, as well as the NSERC Chair for Women in Science. Through these roles, what kind of solutions and issues have you identified in both STEM mentorship, STEM outreach, and so on?
Well, this has been an ongoing debate. So at the center, one thing that I wanted to do is to address this, as I said, using a scientific approach. Meaning, if I were trying to solve some kind of a science problem in the lab, I'd build an experiment, but I'd go and figure out what's already known. What are the factors that impact my experiment? Tweak it to make the best possible experiment, and then see how it works, and then improve it. So I wanted to do the same thing here. Meaning, I wanted to understand what are the factors that do impact the field, and why is it that there are fewer women students, for example, choosing physics and astronomy, and how do the numbers change? Why are things not really improving? Mm-hmm. And one thing we did discover doing that kind of work is that a lot of these initiatives, as you mentioned, things like mentoring, science camps, all these are not really having that much of an impact. Because if you think about it, it's all about trying to fix up the girls or fix the women and get them to somehow adapt. And if only they were more interested, well, they're plenty interested in science. If only they had more tools to, figure out the work-life balance in the workplace, things like this. So it's always put on the women. There's no focus on the system and the environment. And so that's what we are trying to do more of in the center, where we bring actual research-backed initiatives to address what are actually the issues that need to be addressed. Not so much the mentoring, there's too much mentoring, but perhaps move towards more sponsorship, where we allow space for each other so that everybody has a seat at the table. So instead of talking about leaning in, we should really be talking about everybody else leaning out, really, so that there is that extra space. And to think about things like, structural problems. There's still a gender wage gap. There's still issues around women having less resources, less access to grant funding, getting less citations, having a longer path up the career ladder. All of these are measured effects. And these have nothing to do with more mentoring or more science camps or anything like this. So we have to shift away from these sort of ongoing approaches that focus only on the women and take a more systems approach. And that, of course, is where policy comes into. So that's kind of what we've been doing through our center.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So rather than treating the symptoms, as you say, you look
Yes.
at it and try to fix the fundamental issue.
Fix the system, I say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your insights. I do just have one final question. What do you see as the big advantage to the Science Policy Conference that we're holding this year and every year? And what would you say it provides to the science policy landscape in Canada?
Well, from the perspective of the work I do around trying to build a more inclusive community within science itself, you can't do that, of course, without policy. And to actually build better policy, we need to bring all the different stakeholders to the table. The scientists, the policymakers, politicians, of course, researchers, social scientists, scholars who can address and measure what our current situation is, and have that discussion to develop, as I said, research-backed initiatives that will lead to a more inclusive scientific community. And that's what happens at the CSPC conference, and that doesn't actually happen anywhere else that I know of yet in Canada. So I hope CSPC becomes sort of this model to expand on this, so that other conferences that are more perhaps only science focused will actually expand and understand the value of policy. And that's why I think CSPC has always been really important and continues to be very relevant for the future.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.